in my opinion, the best shifts is the sort of like 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, that like you're completely alone with the kiln. You have this relationship with it where it is entirely responsive to you, and it's like you're kind of dancing.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're going to Deptford to meet Lily Pearmain. She's a self-taught potter specialising in throwing and wood firing. Lily's studio is under a railway, so you will hear trains going past at regular intervals throughout the interview. It's not that you won't be able to hear what we're saying, but just a little reminder that studios come in a range of shapes, sizes, locations. So each week throws up a new challenge, and we just have to adapt to the space when we get there. Hi Lily, thank you so much for having me here in your studio in Deptford.
You're very welcome.
And especially because I know you've been moving, house, etc. So it's been a busy time for you personally.
It's been chaotic, but it's good.
Yeah, and inevitably, I mean, with it being the lead up to Christmas, again, it's one of these things where I appreciate you're probably building up stock for...
Yeah, there's always work to be done, but it's a busy time for sure.
Yeah. So you throw, you also hand build.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me a little bit, and you use wood firing?
Yeah.
So do you want to tell me about your technique?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm very process and material led in the way in which I make. So primarily that started out with using the wheel a lot, because I was very fascinated with the process of it, and just trying to improve my skill. I wasn't particularly fussed with the outcome when I first started. So I have, for the past 10 years or so that I've been making, been very focused on improving my skills on the wheel and really focusing on that. More recently, I've started hand building a bit more, kind of as a means of exploration rather than any kind of like design idea or anything. So yeah, there's kind of a very heavy weighting towards throwing, and that's kind of my mindset is very much like throwing and turning and process led. But yeah, there's definitely much more of a presence of hand building at the moment, because it just sort of allows me a different avenue to explore the material, and a different way of experiencing the material and being driven by the process of hand building rather than the process of throwing. So yeah, there's been a slight shift recently, but primarily I've always been a thrower. It's kind of where I started, and it's kind of part of me. It's kind of how I see the material is through throwing. So yeah, there's been sort of some making of like human body parts, and I'm also...
You called them your, was it
like
votive?
Votive pieces. There's this tradition in like Greek Orthodoxy of like using little metal images of parts of your body that you want to sort of heal or interact with. So if someone's pregnant, it would be like a little picture of a baby, or if like you've got a sore wrist, it would be an image of a hand, and you kind of put that up on your door, and every time you pass it, you kind of think about that thing. And that was kind of the starting point for making those, was like, I make with my hands and I make with my body, and I kind of wanted to kind of honour that. So I started making these like hand-built things. That was my road into hand building, I guess. But yeah, I'm also making some tiles at the moment for my bathroom at home. So yeah, just sort of exploring some hand building stuff, but largely it's throwing, for sure.
And you want to talk a little bit about the wood firing, and
yeah,
you mentioned the word chino glaze?
Yes, chino glaze. So in London, your firing options in the kiln are very limited to basically either electric, which is what my kilns here are, or gas, but you need outside space for that, or really, really good ventilation, neither of which I have. When you're wood firing, you need a lot of open space because you produce a lot of smoke, and it's not like you just can't do that in London. So I try to wood fire as much as possible by going on wood firing courses, or like knowing people who have wood kilns who allow me to kind of use them. But wood firing is a very, very different process to electric firing. So with the kiln here, I put the work in, I press a button and I walk away. It's pre-programmed. I don't really have to engage much in the firing process. With wood firing, you know, sometimes it's a 100-hour firing and you are constantly tending it. And so you have to do that in a group. You can't do that by yourself. Which is something I really, really love about it. The communality, the sort of the friendships that are built there. The food is always great because everyone's looking after each other because you're exhausted and you need that. Yeah. And the kind of nub of that firing is that what you're doing is creating a lot of ash through using wood, which then sort of like travels through the kiln and lands on the pot. So there's this kind of directionality in the kiln where you can read a pot and see how it's been loaded into that kiln. You know, I might make slightly differently for a wood firing, so I'd make things maybe slightly chunkier and heavier to withstand the sort of the shocks of the kiln. And the chino glaze, which is what this is. So this has got a chino glaze on it. I mean, this is quite a dark one, but it's got a huge variation. So it kind of ranges from like pearly whites through to this like really dark, really rich iron kind of colour. Yeah. So then, on these pieces, this is wood fired, and it's got no votive. And it's got no glaze on it at all. But the markings you can see on it are sort of, it's the way the kiln's made an impression on it. This is the ash, and then on the back, it's got these marks from the scallop shells, where it's been placed onto scallop shells in the kiln to like separate it from the kiln shelf. And as someone who's making, obviously I have quite a lot of control over what's happening to the piece while it's in my hands.
Your studio.
Yeah, but when it's in the kiln, I'm handing it over to the process completely.
To the elements, in a way.
And it's quite funny because you load a kiln and you spend days meticulously, where should this thing go? What's the best place for that? What are we putting at the front of the kiln? What goes at the back?
And so you're thinking about that as a group.
Do you
have to think about that even when you're making the pieces? Like, do you have to think about the types of pieces you're making and how they're going to like fit in together?
Totally. Right, and what works. Okay, so I can stack this on top. I know this person makes this thing, and I know that if I make a really thick, chunky tile, it's going to sit really nicely underneath it. And like, you want like really tall, thin things. They always go in. It's
almost like a group collaboration.
Yes,
and there's quite a lot
100%.
of. I guess the first time you do it, you'll be learning a lot about each other's processes and what you make, etc. Yeah. But then over time, you kind of grow in confidence. But there's a project management aspect to it, almost, right?
And like, you know, personalities play out in that, and that can be interesting. And then so when you get a really good group together and you're all kind of mates and you all get it and you can all communicate really well, when you're on like 2 hours sleep and you are, you know, dirty and tired and just exhausted, you can fall back on that community that's there and hold each other. And I'm so convinced that the outcome of a wood kiln is entirely dependent on the people on the outside of that kiln who are tending it. And
well, it sounds like it would be, because you're tending the fire and you have to keep it going, and if you haven't gelled well as a team, then the way that you've laid things out inside might not be the most.
Yeah, totally. So the way in which I'm making in anticipation of a wood firing is so bound up in the wood firing. It's not just pots. It's elements of a kiln. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that plays out in 3D, that you're loading it, and some things come out and it didn't work, and you learn and you move on. But some things come out and it wasn't necessarily a particularly remarkable pot going in, but what that kiln has done to that pot makes it just the best pot you've ever made. Every time there's a pot that comes out of a wood-fired kiln, I'm like, that's the best pot I've ever made, and I would not have said that about that pot going in, but the relationship that the kiln has had with that pot has made it. That's outside of me, and it's it's like a collaboration with the kiln, and that always feels like this wonderful little added unexpected element. You know, I can control the clay, I can control the shape, I can control, and that element of taking away control is what makes a good pot, in my mind. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I did not know that there was all of that thought process behind wood firing.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Is it like, do you sort of, I mean, I'm guessing if it's, you said 100 hours or something like that. So do you then sort of have to work out like a shift pattern of like people taking turns, etc. Like almost like you're on a boat together, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly that. And you are guiding this kiln through a very stormy sea. So yeah, there's shift patterns, and it depends how many people are there. I think probably the bare minimum you can really get away with is 5 people. Well,
I guess because even just like having to like make food, like if there's like some of you sleeping, some of you tending the fire, some of you cooking, etc. Like just the bare minimum of that is quite a structure, right? Yeah,
for sure. And you have to, there's a lot of preparation. I think that sometimes the food is the most important part of the firing. It's a really communal experience. In my opinion, the best shifts is the sort of like 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, that like you're completely alone with the kiln. You have this relationship with it where it is entirely responsive to you, and it's like you're kind of dancing together through the sunrise and the badger in the field next door, and it's
isn't that also kind of scary, like the weight of responsibility that if it goes wrong on your watch, it's like all of that group of people's work.
Shorter firings, yes, because you have to meet certain milestones. If over that, like the course of that 6-hour shift, you gain 20 degrees, it's fine, and you wait until people get up and you go, okay, I got it. I didn't drop. I didn't completely lose temperature, but I'm struggling, and I've got no brain power because I've been up since 2 a.m. What do we think? I'm handing it over to you, and I walk away. And that, like, that's where I'm talking about, like, the feeling of being held. It's like it's okay. Like you're never going to really mess it up because it's over such a long period of time that there's always scope to recover it if you have the like perseverance and the knowledge. It's years of knowledge, and the combined knowledge of this community coming together to do it is what makes it. If you were doing it on your own, and I don't have enough experience to guide a wood firing the whole way through, but some people do, and
so you're learning from them.
Yeah, we're learning from each other. I might know certain things, and other people know certain things, and by us all being together and being in this like sleep deprived state, we're all sharing, and we're all sharing experience, and we're all sharing all our knowledge, and that's how I learn ceramics, and anything to do with ceramics. That's how I learn, really, and that's that kind of communality is really, really important to me. I spend all day alone here in this studio when I'm making production mode. And when I am out on these wood firings, it's not just making pots, it's like being part of this community where we're all learning from each other and gaining more than just the pots we take away.
Has there ever been a time when you've taken part in a wood firing and it just like hasn't worked?
Oh yeah. There's been like several of those, and it can be down to several things, the wood being just completely sodden. Right. And so, doing a firing in April and it's rained all winter and it's just not gonna, you're just gonna really struggle. And there's been instances where, personalities have clashed, and it makes it really difficult to manage. Which is why it's important to just be able to put your ego aside in those moments and just be like, okay, what does the kiln need? Because
that's the important thing right now.
Here.
But I'm sure there will be some people who can't think like that.
Yeah.
And then that's a mental note for yourself to like not do it again with them.
Not be that person. Or like, there's definitely an element of like, some of the best firings I've done have been with women. And there's definitely a thing that normally happens around a wood kiln of like, a man explaining fire to you. And it's kind of like, yeah, okay, so that can really put a damper on a firing. But most firings I've ever done have been nothing short of joyous. Yeah.
Something that we talked about, or that you briefly mentioned to me the first time we met, you said something about wood firing requires land. And so that in itself is a barrier to being able to wood fire. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you feel about that?
So, as I already said, to wood fire, you have to be in the middle of the countryside, basically. I'm personally very rooted in London. That's where I live, and I love living here. You need the space to wood fire. You need to be away from people because, you produce a lot of smoke. So you need land, and you need access to land. The way that the housing market is means that most people my age or younger will never have access to that resource, and it is hoarded and is not freely available or easily accessible. And so these opportunities to pass on the experience of wood firing and pass on the knowledge that it requires, the years of experience that you need to really understand how it works, is just so hard to come by because the land is so hard to come by, and there are so few wood kilns in this country anyway. The added complication of needing access and needing land is just sort of a recipe for the specific British tradition of wood firing. It will die out if we can't find a way of learning and developing. And there's always going to be people who are motivated enough to, go to the States or to Japan, where like wood firing is, in Western North Carolina, there's a huge wealth of kilns, but they've just experienced a tornado and an awful storm, and a lot of those kilns have been destroyed. So if we don't have our own systems of protecting wood kilns and protecting land and enabling people to have access to that resource, that skill can't get passed on, and we will lose it, which is, terrifying. People will always want to wood fire, but there might not always be kilns to wood fire.
How many wood kilns do you know of?
Maybe like 20 in the UK.
Okay.
That I know of, that are sort of, there. Not all of those, very, very few of those are open to people. Like they're private kilns. It's a really difficult process. People are not keen to invite inexperienced people into that situation where there's a lot at stake. Yeah. It's an expensive thing to do. To burn that amount of wood is obviously something that should be taken seriously and should not be done sort of flippantly. And so I can only think of like 3 or 4 wood kilns where you can go and
of
sort
the
of
20.
Like, yeah.
Wow. Okay. I can see how that would be problematic.
Yeah. And some potters are just not in any way interested in wood firing, and fine.
Yeah.
And it's not integral. It's a sort of a rock pool at the foot of the ocean of pottery. It's a small subsection of what it means to make pots. But to me, it's a very important part because it's a connection to the ancient tradition of making pots out of clay, because it's the initial technology, it's the first technology of firing it. So it's very important to me for that to be
accessible.
Yeah, accessible and
nurtured.
Exactly, and that skill, especially for young people.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, we've had conversations off camera talking about the choice of being a creative. You talk about being London-based, of being tied to London, of choosing to be here, but the kind of implications that can have on your personal life, perhaps personal timeline, to be our generation choosing a creative career, especially in London.
I think it's interesting for me because I don't really necessarily feel like I have a choice. This is what I do, and it's so integral to who I am. And so much part of me is that I make, and I make pots. And so it doesn't necessarily feel like a choice, it just feels like the circumstances that brings. But it is, you know, it's difficult to be in London, to be self-employed, to be a woman, and to be fully reliant on your own business, for want of a better word. I don't really like describing it as a business, but it is. And to have any kind of certainty over your future is very, very difficult, especially with the way that rents are, and they, you know, ramp up every year. And there's definitely, you know, I don't have any form of maternity pay. I don't have any form of pension. So the idea of making this work sustainable feels like it feels very inaccessible to a lot of people because of the insecurity around it. And the way in which, again, like housing kind of plays into that means that you do have to make quite hard choices about what you want and what you want this career to give you. I'm very, very fortunate to be able to do it, but I also, you know, don't make a lot of money out of it, and it doesn't give me a lot of security. If I wanted to have a family, I would have to give up the studio. When that is sort of something that you're contemplating, I would have to completely give up my job and access to my job in order to do something that I think a lot of people my age really want, but just don't have the security to do. I think it's really sort of quite a sad state of affairs, because it's backing you into a corner, and it's a corner that I've chosen, but it is a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, I think you said something to me that really, I think, will stick with me for a long time. You said that you pay more in studio rents than you pay yourself. Yeah,
I pay more in rent than I pay myself, yeah. Which is really stark. When you say it out loud, it's quite, that's a sort of a difficult pill to swallow. If, you know, I'm very, this space is great. It's a lovely size, it's manageable, and it's local to me, which is really important. But yes, it's studio spaces in London are expensive, and I think if we value craft and we value people's time and their lifestyle and their creativity, then protecting spaces, to make spaces affordable and to make them sustainable and reliable, we need to really have a good conversation about the provision of studios. And that is, it's the basis of making. If you don't have space, you can't, there's no way I could do this without this amount of space.
Yeah.
And that exists more readily outside of London. But I don't want my career choice to drive me out of London. This is my home. And so it can feel like a difficult choice to carry on making and to keep committing to this, because it can feel self-limiting. You know, if I had a craft that was much smaller in nature, then it would be a lot easier. But this is where my heart is, and in this process is what drives me forward every single day. So I can't give it up. Like I said earlier, it's part of my identity.
It's part of you. Yeah. And do you want to, because I think a lot of people, their response would be, well, in that case, work more hours. But I think you've said you've got a developing relationship with time, right?
Yeah. I used to work all the time. I think that there was a period of time where I realised I hadn't taken 2 days off in a row for like a year. And it was just like, wow. that's not sustainable. No. I don't think anybody should live like that. Why am I forcing myself to live like that?
Yeah.
So,
but also very realistically, it's something that you can do in your 20s. It is not something that you can carry on doing, you know, for decades on.
Exactly. And I sort of had this moment of like, what am I doing? Like, this is not good. This is not the way I want to live my life. Like, yes, this is part of who I am, but I am multifaceted and I need a life outside the studio as well. That's kind of why I like made these pieces, was like I was having this conversation with myself about like what it takes to make a person. And so my way of processing that thought and that sort of struggle was to physically make parts of myself. So yeah, I made a hand and a foot because those things are important to me. So it's always, that relationship with work has started to develop into, okay, I give myself time off, like, and I give myself space to breathe, and it makes me a better potter because I come in feeling refreshed and excited, and it means I'm less of a slave to it. I mean, ceramics it doesn't work on a 5-day working week, you know, especially with the changing weather, and it's a cold studio. So in the winter, I might throw something on a Monday and it needs to be turned on the Sunday. It can't be turned on. So I have to come in at that point. But like, I'm trying so much harder now to actually have a balance, and try and do things that I want to do rather than sort of saying yes to everything or doing everything, and just being a bit more like, no, this is how long it takes, and this is how what the process is, and I kind of have to be flexible around that, but at the same time, giving myself a bit of a break as well.
When we were talking about wood fires, you mentioned community, and you mentioned learning from others. I understand that you're self-taught.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe talk about your learning journey?
Yeah. So I was working in a bakery sort of in my early 20s, and I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed being part of like a small team and sort of repetitively doing a process. But I was also sort of maybe a bit frustrated. I didn't really feel like I had much of a creative outlet. So I signed up to like a pottery class. Actually, no, I signed up to a jewellery class. Yeah. I barely wear jewellery. I was just like, it's like something, fun. And they called me up and said, we don't have enough people to run the jewellery class, but there's a pottery class on the same day, and it costs the same, so we can just transfer you over. And I was like, I don't care, fine.
Life has a way.
Yeah, exactly. And so I turned up, and it was like I think it was like a 12-week course, and there was just some like really fun people in the class. I remember there was this it was mostly sort of older women, and it was just so fun. Like, no one really was that fussed about the pots we were making. I got shown a wheel, and I think I got like one demo, and then the teacher was like, off you go. And, she had like 20 other people to tend to. So I sort of worked it out over the course of like that course. And then I went on to join a studio that was like an open access studio. And it was just full of other people who were sort of doing the same thing, just sort of having a play and seeing where it took them. And through that studio, I met so many wonderful, amazing people who are at similar stages of their life to me, who were also all just, having a play. And we all learnt together. I kind of ended up feeling like we're part of a class, like part of a cohort, but there was no hierarchy or teacher. We were all just learning off each other. So these are still like my best friends now. So I was, 24? And we all just, some people are better at some things than others, so we all just learnt off each other, and we would have, communal Friday lunches, and everyone would bring something, and it felt so much like a space that was full of exploration and learning, despite the fact that we were all as clueless as each other. It's still, that's still ongoing. That's still, I text a friend this morning, I'm making some tiles. I know he's just made some tiles. I was like, hey, do I have to keep these weighted under a board? And he was like, yeah. So I was like, okay, cool. He's done that before. He's done that research for me. He knows. Okay, I'll just take that.
So that's why, because you said to me, cohort learning, and I thought that was quite a nice.
Yeah.
So that's why you said that.
Yeah, it's kind of, we're doing it together. It's like a groupthink thing. And I'm still in here doing my thing. I still have, I think, quite a, my own voice within it. But I very much belong to these people, and these people belong to me, and they're part of my making as much as I'm part of theirs, despite the fact that we're scattered over the country now, and we don't necessarily see each other particularly often, but I have this very strong connection to that community. of potters who exist because we were all smushed together in this space.
Does that space still exist?
The space still exists, yeah. It's called Turning Earth.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I've definitely come across it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's still a lot of
very much still a thing.
ceramicists in London go through.
Yeah, it's like a springboard.
That. Yeah,
like,
definitely.
and it was really because, you know, having a studio like this is like a 10-year run up to where I am now. You know, the equipment is very expensive, and you need to sort of just go about learning. It's one of the things I like about ceramics is that it is a never-ending journey of exploration and learning, and there's never going to be a point at which I'm like, I'm done. I'm still learning, and I still want to be learning when I'm 75. Like, I still want to be doing that. But there being like a sort of kind of like an incubator or like a space that can hold you so that you can have a play and it not be so much of like a business is very helpful. It's very nurturing.
Yeah, and very needed. Yeah. So self-taught. You didn't go to art college.
Didn't go to art college.
So what in your upbringing perhaps sort of nurtured?
I think there was always, like a sort of can-do. Both my siblings have creative jobs, and my grandparents, they're refugees, and so when they arrived here, they just kind of had to sort of make ends meet and work out how to do that. So my grandmother was a dressmaker. My granddad was a printer. And so I think there's always been this almost quite like Luddite approach to, you know, just making things with your hands. That's very much like part of my family. And I think also just the like lack of pressure to make it work financially has been quite good, because I came to it quite early. I was quite happy to make pittance for quite a long time. I think if I were to come to it now, I would struggle, because it's quite hard to start out. But the fact that I started out when I was quite happy to not be that secure was very helpful. But yeah, my grandparents are probably quite a big influence on that, and their sort of ability to just sort of make something out of nothing and enjoy it. You know, really enjoy it. My grandmother always had like soil under her nails because she was always in the allotment, and like just that kind of quite wholesome life was always very appealing to me.
Yeah, so creativity was very much in and around your childhood, and very accepted, if not encouraged. Maybe?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that doesn't necessarily extend to like the education that I received.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what's your relationship to, because I think that's, you know, interesting to me that you didn't choose to go to art college, but you are in a creative career. I mean, is there something about the education system that didn't encourage you to do that? Yeah,
I think that the school I went to particularly was not very interested in like an arts education. I do also think that like a formal arts education is not always the underpinning of a creative life. I think obviously it can work really well for some people. I also think that I have developed like a way of thinking about my work and what I do that is so much more like entwined with my life rather than like an academic approach. And I learn by doing, and I think by doing. So I don't necessarily know if I would have ended up in this career or a different career if I'd gone and actually studied it, because I don't necessarily know if that's always helpful. But I also think that if craft and a more varied approach to art had been more available during school, then maybe I would have been in this point just earlier in my life, and I wouldn't have sort of taken such a circumnavigated this life into what it is now. I think it would have been maybe more straightforward. But I'm sure the education system has changed an awful lot since I was there. I'm not necessarily sure that there's any more access to art. And it's not necessarily something that, would necessarily lead to a career. but every single person that I've ever met likes making and enjoys making, even if there's no outcome or there's no necessarily like positive production at the end of it. Every human that I know of likes to make, and if that is something that we can encourage, I'm pretty sure a lot more people would be a lot more happy.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, but I guess we're both biased, so it's kind of hard to prove a point when you're starting off from that perspective. But it is intrinsic to the human experience to, even if cooking can be considered that, and there's lots of sort of interactive like touch points, of the human experience that are linked to making in some way. Yeah. And it might not necessarily be artistic. No. But it is there throughout our lives. Yeah. You talk about being material-led rather than design-led. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so my approach to making is generally to look at the material and look at what the material does best, rather than thinking about what I want that outcome to necessarily look like. Obviously, I feel like I have a distinctive voice with what my work looks like, but that comes from a place of embracing the material and the process. So like a lot of my work has these sort of fingerprints in it, and that's because that's how I dunk the pot into the glaze, and how I hold it. And it's really amazing, it's really sweet, because people often, when they like notice it, will try and place their fingers over it as well, and it's like we're holding hands. It's really, really sweet. And like I leave these throwing lines because I'm not interested in covering up the process. And so the design, I guess, is the process. And I think through the designs by doing that, and there's certain things that happen that I kind of have a rule for myself in the studio, whereas if I make something and it's like an exploration and I don't necessarily love it, I have to fire it. I have to see it the whole way through, because if I don't, I kind of am only seeing the design of it, and the process might change it. So it's like I'm having a conversation with the clay, and it's sort of letting me know what it wants to do and what works best and how it wants to respond to my touch. And that is kind of, like an integral part of what I'm making, is that it shows how it's been made. I'm not trying to be tricksy. I'm not trying to be clever with the pots. A good pot is a good pot. I don't want to mess with that. There's bowls that are thousands of years old that are beautiful bowls and they work perfectly. I'm never going to reinvent a bowl. So I don't necessarily want to design it. I just want it to feel natural and feel like it's come into being without me fighting it. Like a lot of my pots, like this belly on this vase, the clay wants to go into this like rounded shape. It's really a delight when the clay responds in a way that you can read. It really wants to do that thing. It wants to belly out, and it just feels like a nice making process to not be fighting it constantly.
So you're letting the material speak to you in a way.
Yeah, and letting it inform the end product. The fact that pots come out of the studio, come out of the kiln at the end, is kind of a byproduct of this process. It's not necessarily the driving force of me making. It's not that I want to have a product at the end. It's that I want to engage in this process. I want to engage with this material that is so human and so responsive to my touch. So I don't necessarily feel like I have never sat down and drawn a pot. Like that's
you like feel your way to it.
Yeah. Because I think if I am to sort of think about it like that, I silence the clay, I silence the process, I silence the material. So by allowing it on the wheel or in my hand when I'm glazing to kind of show me the best way forward. I mean, maybe this is also part of being self-taught, is like I just have a very exploratory approach to it. But I really enjoy that. And I think that comes across. I feel like in the pots you can tell that I've enjoyed making that. Oh, I hope you can anyway.
And I would agree. I mean, so I own one of your Chino glazed cups, very similar to this one, and it's, you know, made me smile when you said about the fingerprints, because I do that sometimes. You know, I'm holding my cup of tea or coffee or whatever, and I'm sort of like playing around. Anyway, it's I guess the presence of a maker is there even once you hand it over, and that is what what drew me to your work, is that I can, like, even once you're not holding it anymore, you're still part of it, and I think that's a really lovely thing. And I did really like the fact that you weren't trying to make it perfect, that it's you're part of the story of that cup, and it's no, that's great. Do you want to talk maybe about the salt pigs?
Yeah, so the salt pigs came about because I have a stockist called Kentish Town Stores, who they sell a lot of my work, and they're really great, and I have a really good relationship with the owner, Lucy, and she came down a couple of years ago, have a chat, see the studio, see what I'm working on, and she was like, oh, I think you should make some salt pigs. And I would never have thought to. That would not have crossed my mind at all before. Weirdly, I do own a salt pig, so I don't know why it hadn't crossed my mind, because the salt pig I own is actually really special to me. It was my grandmother's, and it was made in the village that she grew up in West Germany. And I've actually stayed in that pottery. And I have it at the side of my stove, and I sort of, interact with it every day. So I don't know why I hadn't thought to make it.
Or maybe because it's so part of the fabric of your everyday that it was too obvious to be noticed.
Yeah, or maybe I didn't want to touch that memory or something, like just leaving it be that, letting it be that thing. Anyway, I spent a month or so playing around, trying to work out what I wanted the salt pig to look like, and I ended up going super traditional with it. But they've been people really like them, they've been really popular. And I would never have made that if Lucy hadn't suggested that to me. And for me, that relationship is a really, really important part of the way in which I work. I'm aware that I'm not just sending these pots out into a void, I'm sending them to be interacted with people who have a relationship with me or have a relationship with the shop that they've bought them from. And so engaging with that and letting outside influence like that come into the studio is really engaging for me and really, invigorating. I don't exist in a void, and I think it's really nice that Lucy, who sells a lot of these pots and isn't a potter, but she sort of put that to me. She was like, I think you'd be the right person to make this thing. That'd be really good. And it felt really empowering. And the same, she also suggested the oil pourers. And another stockist of mine, Elliot's, they're in Edinburgh, they asked for butter dishes. And I would never have thought to make those, but they really challenged me because they're quite a difficult shape. I have to square it off, and I have to create a base and a lid, and it all has to fit properly. And so it was this really lovely challenge, but it's part of my relationship with those people who invest in me, basically, by buying my work to sell on, and who enable me to do that, to work in a way where I can play about, and they put a lot of trust in me to do that, and that's a really beautiful thing.
So you are open to commissions, and you are open to people challenging you in some ways, for sure, to make new things that you haven't made before. I mean, I enjoy being handed it and without specification. Like I was saying about not designing things, just being what's your idea of a salt pig, or what's your idea of a butter dish? That's really, really... So being given a concept and then letting you run with it.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like being given a little bit of homework in a way that's quite exciting. So that whole process is really... really down to the relationship that we've built over years, and it allows me to make new things and to challenge myself and to explore new shapes. So the outcome is a salt pig, but the start is trust and it's a relationship. So it's not just a salt pig.
Yeah. Do you want to say a little bit about the importance of working to commissions and through stockists versus other work?
So the majority of what I do is work with stockists to commission. I find that has come about because of where I am, because I'm in London, because I have limited space, because I have historically had much smaller studios than this. I generally like making things knowing that they're going out the door, that they've got a purpose, they've got a direction. I don't really want to be sat with pots for years on end trying to sell them to a customer, because that's not my strong suit. I'm not a salesperson. I like getting in and sitting down making. I love coming in. I've got this whole system of spreadsheets, and I love coming in and I check the spreadsheet and I check what needs to be made and I check what deadline's coming up, and I then can sit down at the wheel and not look at my emails all day because I'm just making this thing. And I don't have to think, is this going to sell? Am I going to be able to sell this? I'm making, and I'm being allowed to make things that have a direction and a purpose. And I think if I were based elsewhere, I have a pot of friends who are based around the country who don't make like that because they have excessive space, and so they can just make what they want to make and then go to markets and sell it. Whereas I just don't have the space to hold on to huge amounts of pots that I then go out and sort of flog. And I don't know, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. I don't know if I don't want to work like that, or my situation has decided that I don't work like that, and so I'm sort of anxious about working like that, so I don't. It's the way that it's developed is to largely work to commission. So normally what happens is I get an order, I work on it, and then, that order enables me to then go and have a week of sort of playing or of experimenting or trying something out, and kind of it keeps the studio ticking over. And I really enjoy that balance, trying to strike that balance, because it's never right. You never get it. So it's, again, it's another thing to almost like play with, is where that balance falls of like, when I'm making things that like I've had an idea and I want to try this thing out, or, I'm making and I know that this is going somewhere and someone wants this and there's a purpose to this. So that playfulness, you never get it right, but it is.
So it's good to be able to weave into your timetable, because otherwise, if you don't intentionally put it in, I think the stress of being a freelancer just takes it away, basically.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I don't think I would do very well if I was like told, oh, you've got a market in 3 months, you've just got to make for it. Because that idea of, is this a good enough pot to sell, would get in the way of me just exploring and learning and growing. So having that relationship with stockists is super, super important to me.
Yeah. Do you want to, I think one of your other stockists is Toast, am I right?
Yeah. So I've been working with Toast for like 2 years now or so. They're really respectful of the process, and they're very interested in sort of me making new things and them coming and seeing what I'm making. It's really nice having that reach, knowing that those pots are going into shops all over the country. And again, like coming in and like having on my making list like 600 mugs. I know that the more mugs I make, the better those mugs are. Just through repetition, through process, through like engaging. I think there was a point where I was like eyeball deep in mugs. And it got to the point of like my process being so sort of honing that process to the point of like even how I laid my tools out when I started in the morning was important to that whole process. And it really like streamlined the whole process of making a mug, which, kind of like I was saying earlier, I want the pots to kind of come into fruition rather than me like fighting with the material to make it happen.
It almost sounds ceremonial.
Yeah, like, you know? I'm just sort of, I'm another instrument, I'm another tool, and the pots, the sort of the setup for it is...
like you're enabling the pot to come to life.
Exactly that, enabling the pot to come to life. That's a really nice way of putting it. That I'm just part of it. And yeah, it's a conversation.
I'm trying to think, has there ever been anything someone's asked you to make and you thought, I've got to say no, actually?
I don't necessarily think that it's about the pot. I think it's about the relationship. So I think if someone sort of comes to me and they're like, I want this in 2 weeks and it has to be this design and it's specific and it's this, and there's no space for my voice within that.
Or for the clay's voice.
Or for the clay to sort of, speak, or, you know, if they're very specific about sort of colours or like how they want the clay to be, I kind of know that we're maybe not that well aligned, that they're not necessarily open to the process. I think that there's definitely a tendency for people to want handmade pots without accepting that there might be variation. And I think, I mean, having just used the word handmade, I think I do have a slight issue with the word handmade, because everything is handmade. There's not anything that I can think of that we interact with on a daily basis that it doesn't have some form of labour attached to it. But when people say handmade, they obviously mean by someone in this country working under circumstances in a studio. So sometimes I think people want to be able to say handmade, but what they actually want is a consistent product that is factory made. Yeah. So there's maybe sometimes a misunderstanding of what that means. And that's when I'm like, I don't actually think that I'm the right person for that. And I'm happy to point people in directions of other makers or other ways of getting their hands on those pots. But that doesn't happen very often, if I'm honest. That, you know...
Well, I think you don't put out an image as someone who would be happy to make something that looks factory made.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So I think people coming to me know that generally this is what the pots look like, and there is marks of the process left, and there is, an element of freedom within them that's not necessarily always going to make them exactly the same. You know, I can make fairly similar pots, but they're made by me, and you know, sometimes my mind wanders.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, they can vary.
Yeah. We've talked about projecting a particular image. We've also talked about community building with other potters. You're on Instagram. Does that kind of play into those things? And also maybe, you know, talking about the positives or the negatives of your relationship with the platform.
I think I've been making for a long enough time that I'm comfortable with what my work looks like, and I don't necessarily need to put pictures of it out there all the time. I don't necessarily need to document it all the time. There's plenty of work. I'm kind of looking over at my shelves now. Plenty of work on there that I have never taken a photograph of, and I'm not interested in doing that, because there is within my work and my attitude sort of an idea of plenty. Like, I will just keep on making, and that work will change. So I, you know, occasionally take photographs and put them on Instagram. I don't do that particularly often anymore. It doesn't necessarily feature in my day-to-day life, as to like sit down and take a photograph of something and to put it on Instagram. I don't necessarily want to have that as an interference in my process. Sort of the idea of filming every single aspect of it feels to me like an interruption, and doesn't necessarily feel like something that's natural. I'm sure to lots of people it is. It's just not the way my brain is wired. And I think you can end up having an over-reliance on it. I've never really been a particularly successful salesperson, so I don't necessarily, I'm sure that it has many, many benefits, but I'm not necessarily interested in pursuing them. The one thing that I would say that like Instagram has been quite good for me has been my connection with and to other potters. So it enables me to find other people's work and to see what they're doing and what they're up to and maybe learn from them. It also forms, can form real relationships where, I've gone and spent time, I've stayed at people's houses who I've met through Instagram. Don't do that, kids. And because they're potters and we get on, and it's a way of, but I'm also sure that if that hadn't have happened through Instagram, it would have happened through a different means. And, it's a small industry. And people know each other, so you do end up connecting anyway, especially if you're interested in going to, exhibitions and going and doing firings and stuff. You always meet new people. Obviously, Instagram as a platform allows you to have more reach, but I think it can also be quite stifling.
Do you think that might be the way you work? Because a lot of people who work to private commissions or who sell directly to individuals, they rely on Instagram quite heavily, whereas obviously you're relying more on stockists.
Exactly, right? So I've never really wanted to do that, to be reliant on it, because it's probably something that could be taken away at any moment. And
how did you come across your stockists? Did they come across you on Instagram or somewhere else?
I think, so when I first started, I did lots of markets.
Fine.
I think that then, got me into a sort of one shop, and then someone sees that and they say, oh, that's nice, I'll get in contact with her. It's like a slow, organic building. Right. Kind of like I said, when I first started making and selling pots, I was still working like as a waitress. I was a babysitter. I had all these other things that were just supplementing, supporting what I was doing. And so it took the pressure off a little bit. And so, my access was through markets and selling direct to people, and you never know who, you're selling to really, but I'm sure some of those people went on to have conversations with people who are now my wholesale customers. I'm sure that that's how that happened. I'm not particularly good at being like, how did you find me? To like stockists or people who approach me. But I would say it's not dependent on social media, and I would never really want it to be, because it makes me feel icky.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm wondering, is there anything else that we haven't talked about? I guess actually, sorry, I just thought of something. You mentioned that you collect pots yourself.
Yeah.
Do you collect things that are quite different to what you make?
Yeah, for sure. I collect a very wide range of ceramics. I think I try to buy, whenever one of my friends has an exhibition, I will buy something. I will turn up and I will be at the private view and I will buy something. As a show of support. Yeah, as a show of support, but then I also end up with some really lovely pots. And then, I seek out things. I buy stuff secondhand. If I'm at a car boot sale, that's just, ripe for the picking. And then, I'm always swapping pots, especially after wood firings. There's always a big oh, I like that. So that's, a big source of my pots, but also I inherited quite a lot from my grandparents. So I inherited quite a lot of pottery. I'd say I'm not necessarily a particularly sentimental person, but I do like holding on to pots, and they break when you use them regularly. I've dropped 2 mugs on concrete floors in the past 3 months, and obviously that's a shame. But it's also an opportunity to buy another pot. So it's not the worst. Yeah.
Have you ever bought something that actually has inspired your work, where you really, there was something about it that sort of called to you to try?
I would say that generally when I'm inspired by someone else's work, I'm looking at a body of work rather than an individual pot. So I'm looking at the way in which they've used a certain material, or they've used a certain process or a tool. I wouldn't necessarily say that there are any like particular pots. I mean, like I was saying earlier about the salt pig, that was very much definitely, well, I thought it was a riff on the one that I use at home every single day. And then when I took one home and compared it like for like, they were so different because it had been the jumping off point. It wasn't the end of the process. I'm not like kind of copying. I would say that like generally, you're not ever going to make a pot that's never been made before. All these pots have been made before. Yeah. We've been making pottery as humans for thousands of years. So that pot has already been made. And so I'm not squeamish about looking at other people's pots and going, I like that aspect of it. I like that foot ring. I'm going to try that out. Because it's going to be in my clay and it's going to be in my glaze and it's going to have my approach to it. So it's going to end up being mine. But it does, all pots reference each other and they reference everything that's come before.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's what you're saying is quite similar to the way I always feel odd saying I collect ceramics, but I guess accidentally I've fallen into that category. And for me, it is very much looking at someone's whole body of work, looking at what they make, and generally what the style is. And I often will kind of study their, like not study in an academic way, but I will look at their work for a long amount of time before I buy something. And by the time I buy, it's usually something that I've come to, it'll be like a little corner of their practice. That I've
it won't be the initial thing that grabbed you.
No.
It's, you've kind of worked through who they are and been like, okay, well, there's space for a plate in my life right now, rather than that jug that initially caught my eye.
That isn't, and I just somehow justify making this space.
Exactly.
But yes, I think that really echoes with and you know, despite the fact that I don't make myself and I don't have really a technical understanding of how one makes pots, but I take great joy in looking at them and looking at the different varieties, and it's like an endless world of creativity. And
I think it's just so inherently human a material. We're so connected to it. You know, anyone who drinks coffee or tea or eats off a ceramic plate, you know, we're all interacting with it daily. And it's the thing that you look for when you're on an archaeological dig. You look for ceramics. It's so innately human. And so there's this real connection to it that I think is almost spiritual. It's like it's bigger than us because it tracks back in time.
Well, this has been really fun. I feel like we've covered a lot as well.
We've spanned a lot,
And I'm really grateful to you for making the time and for hosting us here.
It's nice to chat.
Same. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If you would like to find out more about Turning Earth, I have popped the link below and also included our links to some of Lily's stockists. I would love to hear about people's experiences of being self-taught in the comments below. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word and subscribe. See you next week.
Please.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh yeah, that's good.